Before we start this show, just a word from our sponsor, 20 by 20 Apparel. Founded in 2015, 20 by 20 Apparel brings original tributes to pro wrestling's classic arenas, moments, and events. They look to spotlight the bloopers, bleeps, and body slams along with the biggest, smallest, strangest, and strongest that pro wrestling has had to offer. Along with their awesome line of pro wrestling apparel, they do offer many services. In the world of wrestling, there are hundreds of shirts, promotions, flyers, social media accounts, and ads. Don't get lost in the sea of parody shirts and display fonts. They can provide professional graphic design services at a reasonable price. 20 by 20 also hand screen prints all the tees in-house. If you would like to discuss possible run of tees, posters, koozies, foam fingers, or whatever, drop them a line. Go to 20 by 20 Apparel. That's the number 20x, the number 20 apparel.com. Now, let's get to the show.
Fresh is the word.
I'm Jim Duggan, got long wood for plenty hoes. I keep it fresher than fresh, but you already know. You suckers bummy, I'm money, I got a ton of flows. My weed loud like a motherfucking thunder roll. Your shit quiet like you ballin' on a budget though. We see your kicks and we laugh and yellin' what are those. You see me shining like a suit on puffy. You know my grindin' shit is too strong, buddy. That's why the dude call money. I be stuntin' like it's nothing at all. Cause it's nothing to me, it's probably something to y'all. Trying to smoke like me, then come and fuck with your dog. Got a closet full of kicks, you can't cop it tomorrow. And I'm fresher than the freshest, you can tell it's in my essence. Bitch, you see the way I'm rapping, yes I do this shit to death. Until I'm running out of breath, or tell somebody cut a check. But either way you know it's fresh, and either way you know it's fresh. Fresh, we fresh. Fresh, fresh, goddammit, we fresh.
Welcome to the Fresh is the Word podcast. I am your host, Kelly K. Fresh Frazier. And on Fresh is the Word, we like to deliver wisdom through great stories from the minds of bright creatives of pop culture. Through those stories, we like to dissect the journey of our guests and present actionable lessons and advice for our listeners, no matter what career or avenue of artistry they pursue. This is episode 115. And this episode's guest is DJ, music historian, and curator, DJ Amir Abdullah. Known for his on-track mixtapes with DJ Kon, Amir currently runs his own record label, 180 Proof, founded in 2011, which owns the exclusive rights to release Strata Records' influential back catalog and unreleased sessions. During our conversation, we talked about Amir's roots in music, his collaborations with DJ Kon in the on-track mixtapes, becoming a music historian and curator, researching music to reissue Unearth, obtaining the Strata Records catalog and the history and political activism of Strata in Detroit, and the new release of the Charles Mingus Jazz in Detroit Strata Concert Gallery 46 Selden, and the stories behind these unreleased recordings. And before we get into this interview with DJ Amir, I definitely want to give a shout out to Knox Money, Bang Belushi, and Foul Mouth for the theme music for Fresh is the Word. And also want to remind you how you can support the podcast. You can always go to freshasthepodcast.com and share any of the links that you see on the website on any of your social media platforms. You can also subscribe to Fresh is the Word pretty much on any platform that streams podcasts. And that includes Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Stitcher Radio, Mixcloud, Google Play, TuneIn, Spotify, Breaker, Castbox, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Podbean, and Radio Public. Pretty much everywhere. Fresh is the Word is everywhere. And if you want to leave a rating and review anywhere, especially Apple Podcasts, that'll definitely help out the show. And you can also email me anything you want, questions, comments, concerns, at djkfresh@gmail.com. And also you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at kfreshistheword, and on Facebook at facebook.com/kfresh. And also you can follow Fresh is the Word on Twitter at freshistheword, but with a Z in the is. And on Instagram at Fresh is the Word Podcast, and on Facebook at facebook.com/freshithepodcast. All right, let's get into the interview with DJ Amir Abdullah. For people from my generation of hip hop, I'm 37 now. Like the
Okay.
Kon and Amir mixtapes were like such like a cool thing for all of us.
Oh
And
wow. Okay.
I just
Thank you.
remember like my friend putting me up on those, and I was just like, "Oh snap!" I think I still have one of them on cassette somewhere. Um,
Oh, okay. Okay.
and
Nice.
yeah, those were really dope. Before in now you have this. You curated this Charles Mingus performance from Detroit. And before
Right.
we get into this, I definitely want to just quickly do some background about where you come from. You
Okay.
you label yourself as a DJ, a music historian, and a curator. How did you
Right.
first get into just being involved in music, having a love of music? Where did that all come from?
It really stems from my and it really stems from my father. You know, my father was a big jazz record collector, and it just kind of stems. It just kind of ties into the Mingus thing. Where my father grew up with Jackie Byer. Jackie Byer was the pianist in Mingus's band early on for a few years as well. So growing up in a household of like a lot of jazz, and my mom listening to gospel, and brothers and sisters listening to everything from disco to to rhythm and blues and all that other stuff. It just was around me. And then I'm 48, so I grew up basically when hip hop began. So like just being a child of hip hop too, helped me cater, or like help shape my musical taste, and that's really how it started, to tell you the truth. From there, from my father, I always give him credit for that, and my family, so
When did
yeah.
when did you start DJing or start just like collecting music and sort of getting this sort of curator mind to yourself?
Well, I started collecting records pretty much when I was a young kid, because like being at the age I am, like in the 70s, like at Woolworth, they used to sell records and stuff like that. So, like my brothers and sisters would never let me use their records or touch their records. So, I would have to go buy my own. So I would take, like other kids would spend the money on candy and stuff, or whatever. I spent it on records. If I wasn't spending on records, I was spending on comics or baseball cards, so that's what I was doing. And then, in the advent of hip hop, like you couldn't buy an MP3 or Wave or stream anything. So like if you wanted it, you had to go to the store and buy the 12-inch or the album. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then just spiral from there. And then the other thing is just like for me DJing, I didn't really become a DJ until like me and Khan kind of started doing what we were doing, because before that I was just really happy to just be a music lover and a record collector, and then, when we first put out our first official compilation album, Friday, Uncle Junior's Friday Fish Fry on Seven Head Records back in 2004, we got asked to tour in Europe, and that's when I was like, well, I think I should learn how to DJ. So I did, and and then the whole curating music historian thing just came from I went to grad school. I mean, well, I went to college and I went to grad school for like, sociology and African history. So, that aspect of researching and being a historian in terms of like academia kind of, spilled over into my world of music, So it was like an easy transition, because it's, for a lot of the stuff that I'm into, and being able to rediscover a lot of, forgotten gems, it takes a lot of research, it takes a lot of, know-how to do that. So, these are things that I either have naturally come to me or I've learned a long time ago, or and are now a natural part of myself, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Extending on what you just said,
So,
you said you went to school for African history. How did that
yeah.
education go into being a music historian and a curator? What was like the definite like skills that you were able to learn with that education that was able to be transferable into being a music historian?
Well, all right. So my being at college, and I studied African history and sociology. what those things brought to me in terms of like, just being a music historian and everything was just like I was able to like really just go beyond of like, because there's I'm not the first label to reissue certain kind of music, jazz, whatever, and
Yeah.
I won't be the last, but I think what I bring to the table is more of an appreciation for the culture of the music and not just like, all right, here's the music. You know what I mean? Like one of the things that really attracted me to Strata Records was that, they have a great history behind them. Like Lenny Sinclair and John Sinclair were part of the White Panther Party in Detroit.
Yeah.
They knew Yoko Ono and John Lennon. They had a special relationship with them. The guys at Strata started the first jazz music program at Oberlin College. In 1970. Same thing at State University. So they had like a history of trying to help the community. And the only way you would really kind of know that is if you were from that time, or if you're someone like my age and not from Detroit, you have to do your research and you have to be willing to be able to do that. It has to be instinctive to be able to do that. And you learn those skills over time, by either like myself going to college and, being taught to have those kind of, to have that skill set, or it just comes natural to you. And so that's why I was able to like, I can say with confidence that, I'm a curator because I've curated a lot of different things, over time, and a historian is because I always do research on stuff, I always try to find out the backstory to the backstory, because there's always a backstory to the backstory, you know what I mean? So like,
Right.
that's just, how I do it,
When you're doing this research and looking to unearth these old recordings, what makes something good to be reissued or to bring back to light in this era?
Well, for one, like I said before, it's not just the music, it's got to be the story behind it. To me, that's the most interesting thing because, like being a record collector back in the days, you would get a record, you look at the back of the back cover, back jacket, and you read about, either the liner notes, read who played on the record, and then you go do research on like, oh wow, I like the way he played horn on this record. Did he ever do any records by himself? You know what I'm saying? And it just spirals into other stuff. So, it's the stories behind a lot of these records. And, if you can get a chance to meet the artists or musicians, if they're still alive, and you can get even more, of a story behind why they made the music that they did, and, what was it like for them, and, why, in their opinion, they weren't as successful or successful, like it could be either or, some people say that, like their failure is their greatest, achievement sometimes, and so that's just really how I look at it, for me, it's just like not just the fact that it's great music, and it's great music. It can't just be like one song on the record makes the recording really rare, and so everybody wants it just for that one song. It's like I want to be able to like reissue a record or get involved with curating, a reissue that has a great story behind it in each song. Each song is speaking to each other, and that therefore like the whole story speaks to you and to the listener. Because I think people get more into the record and just, instead of like, oh, here's a record, like I think
Right.
people are a lot more sophisticated these days,
Right. What was the first thing that you really took a deep dive into?
Oh, you mean music-wise? It would
Yeah.
be jazz, definitely. Because that's how I grew up on. That's what I grew up on was jazz. So like, it would definitely be that. My father loved Clark Terry. Uh, Eric Dolphy, Mingus. Like all those type of records. I grew up with, and seeing the original presses and how my father took great care of them, and that's why I couldn't touch them, and I had to eventually go buy my own. But my father's no longer here anymore, so those are all his records I have now. So it's a lot of music. But my first love was like jazz, and then as I got older, I started listening to my brother's records. So beat like disco and boogie and funk and soul and all that stuff. And then as I got even older, hip hop just really just took over. Especially for, a lot of us of the hip hop generation. Hip hop spoke to us in a way that, made sense.
How did your partnership with Khan originally happen?
Well, I'm originally from Boston too. I moved to New York in '95. Um, and when I was back, I think in like '96, I was working for some. I was an intern for some like local, one of those indie rap labels at the time, and I had some promos on me, and so I went to a record store here in Boston that's no longer open. It was called Biscuit Head Records, and I knew the owner, and we were just talking, kicking it about politics in the music industry at the time.
Yeah.
And Khan happened to be in the store, and he was like, "Yeah, man, I actually kind of agree." And I was like, "Oh, okay. What's your name, man?" And he was like, "Chris," and we started talking, and we struck up a conversation, and then I was like, I was with a friend and she was driving me, and so we had to go. And I was like, "Hey man, you need a lift anywhere?" He was like, "Well, I live right up the street." So we get in the car, and I'm listening to one of my mixes that I made of of rare breaks or whatever. And as soon as she turns on the car, the cassette tape goes into the automatically goes into the thing and it starts playing. And he's like, "Yo, you in the records?" And I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "Oh shit, so am I." And so we just started talking, and then that's how it really started. It took me to move to New York to meet him, back in Boston, where we're both from. And
Right.
we knew a lot of the same people, but we just never got a chance to like meet, while we were here, which is weird, but that's how life is sometimes.
What sort of reception did you get for those on-track mixtapes that you and Khan did back in the day?
Well, I can tell you when we first put them out, because I hand dubbed all of them on my single cassette, on my double cassette deck, so
Right.
I would be dubbing like 100 in a week, and I would travel around in a bag. This is like '97, so I'm with a backpack, with all these different mixtapes on it, and it was hard because at the time in New York, it was all about Ron G, DJ Clue, SNS, all the mixtape DJs playing all the new hip hop stuff.
Yeah.
So you're coming in there with like a tape of like samples, and then you got to try to explain it so that the person behind the counter gets it. It was tough. It was really, 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 really tough. But I didn't give up, and I happened to work at Fat Beats Distribution at the time, and so like there was a guy that was Japanese that was working with me, and I gave him the tape, and he came back to me. He was like, "Yo, I have a store in Japan that wants 100 on track cassettes," and I was like, "Word, really? Okay." So I spent the week dubbing them, and I wrote my well, I didn't even have a cell phone number back then. I had a pager, so I wrote my
Yeah.
pager number on it. And it's weird because I'm living in Germany now, right? And so I've been to some like DJs' houses, and they like to show off their cassette collection, and they'll pull out like the first on track cassette, and I'll have my like pager number on it. I'm like, wow. I can't
Right.
even. I'm sure you guys tried it. Like some people were like, I tried to call it. I was like, yeah, well, uh, sorry about that. But so that's really the story of it, and you know, it just was a hard thing, and I was like, well, we'll do one more and see how it happens, and then just kind of like kept spiraling from there, and it just kept getting bigger. But in the beginning, it was super, super, super tough. I used to get dissed a lot. People were like, "Yo, this is whack." What, like, why aren't you playing the whole song? Why aren't you putting a track listing on there? Why? That was all. You know what I'm saying? Like, but we had a purpose, and we had a vision of what we wanted to do, even if it was just for us. You know.
Right. How did you first get involved in obtaining the Strata Records catalog?
Well, the journey for me to that was I used to run, and I started Wax Poetics Records. Wax Poetics magazine, they had a record label.
Yeah.
And when I said that, if I ever got in a position like that, one of the first records that I would reissue was the Lyman Wooded Saturday Night Special
Right.
album. So when I got in that position, I called up my boy House Shoes, and I was like, "Yo, Shoes, can you help me find like Lyman?" And he was like, "Well, I don't know Lyman, but I know John Sinclair." So, then John gave me like Kenny Cox's number. So I spoke to Kenny like probably a few months before he passed away. Um, and he was like, well, I gave, I think he was like, I think I gave Lyman, the rights back or something like that. So he gave me Lyman's number. I called him and we had a conversation on the phone. And I went out to Detroit. I took him to his favorite restaurant. He came to the restaurant with Ron English, and they both gave me their masters for, Fish Feet and Saturday Night Special. So from there, Scion, when they used to have this thing called the Scion IQ Museum, which is like, online museum or whatever, they'd asked me and a few other people to like submit, something on, lost youth culture from the past. So I submitted something on Strata and they accepted. So they got me and a film crew to come to Detroit. I met Barbara Cox on the phone. I told her I was coming. I wanted to come and interview her and talk about the masters. And I was like, so the first thing I asked her, I was like, man, a closed mouth doesn't get fed, man. So I asked her, I said, do you have any masters or anything that was unreleased from Strata? Because I only know of 6 records that they officially released. She was like, yeah, I'll bring some up, and show you. I come, I see the masters, and I was just like, you know what? I would like to do a deal with you where I can reissue this catalog. I just took a chance. The worst she could say is no.
Right.
You know what I mean? But she said yes. And I was super happy. I kept it so close to the chest. I didn't tell anybody until it was signed on a dotted line between her and I.
Yeah.
Because, and then when I did, people were like, oh my God, how'd you get a hold of Strata? I was like, I didn't do anything like super impossible. I mean, she is listed in the phone book in Detroit. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like, I had to go like digging to the center of the earth to find her. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
So, but again, I'm not saying that in a flippant way, because I'm really blessed to be able to have this opportunity, to do this. So that's really how I got to Strata. It's just that long, convoluted journey, I guess.
What was it about the story of Strata that you liked that really, made you want to reissue these recordings?
Well, I really like the story of Strata because if like speaking to like Barbara Cox, the owner, she talks about in 1967, Detroit had obviously a riot, another one following the next year in 68, and she always calls them not a riot but the insurrections against the political system, and just the treatment of black men, especially in 67, getting gunned down in Detroit, so just the story of them trying to give back to the community in a way that had been devastated, 2 years in a row. Education, in terms of, like I said, creating the first jazz music programs at Oberlin and Wayne State University and doing food drives and having the Strata Concert Gallery so that, it was cheap enough so that, people who normally couldn't, I don't know, pay $20, $30 to see Mingus, they were paying $5 to see Mingus. Yeah. Which is unheard of, and it was, from what I heard, it was a non-alcoholic venue so that all, ages could come and see, these great musicians, and they started their own publishing company, their own booking agency. They were like a really self-sustained artist collective run and owned started by Kenny Cox, and to me, that was a great story. And on top of that, the music was awesome. You know what I'm saying? Like the music is awesome. The visuals of all the covers, has like a certain aesthetic so that when you see a Strata record, oh yeah, even if you can't even see the artist up close, but just the design, you're like, oh, that's a Strata record.
Right.
Just the whole simple black and white, people were like, oh, why do they only do black and white? I mean, honestly, John Sinclair was like, we didn't have budget to do color covers, but the black and white, it worked for them.
Right.
So, hey, all hats off to them, So that's really why, I chose Strata.
Speak about the political activism of Strata in regards to their position in Detroit.
I mean, I can only speak very little of that. I mean, I would have to talk to Barbara Cox about that. But I mean, from what I understand is that, they were trying to, basic like Tribe Records, I'm sure you know of Tribe Records, Phil Raylan,
Yeah.
Marcus Belgrave, Harold McKinney, and those guys. They were just basically trying to educate the community music wise and have a space, a safe creative space, the Strata Concert Gallery, for people to come to mingle, to create, to improvise, and to have that, but also, trying to educate people on how to have your own publishing, to be able to book your own tours, how to how to hook up with distributors, how to press records, just in that way having an education of really how to be self-sufficient. Whereas I think with Tribe, they have the Tribe magazine, which was kind of like the Black Panther news as well of Detroit, so they were even taking it a step further, but from what all I know is that, Strata was definitely deeply involved in the community in the way that, most indie labels would have not been at that time.
During this time period, which is the late 60s, early 70s, how important do you think was that sense of community that Strata was doing for just the city of Detroit?
I mean, it was definitely very important. Like I said, in '67 and '68, that those two big riots, man, that just totally devastated that city, amongst other things, And so, it was important for people or collectives like Strata to do what they did because, and when you have a situation like that, man, I mean, the only other city I can remember that had two riots in a row, and which is in a similar situation like Detroit, was Newark, you know. And when you have a situation like that where people go through that, it's like people just give up hope, man. And your community just looks like shit, basically. But you don't want people to feel like shit. You want people to feel like, that there's still hope and that there's still a way to get out of this, this circumstance they're in. So, for some people that's, joining the Black Panthers. Some other people that's, joining the White Panthers. Or some people it's, hey, let's open up a concert venue. Let's hold our revolution in terms of a music way. Or let's protest in our own way in a music way so that, we can at least give people an outlet, so that we just don't all go insane and go crazy and make things even worse, So I think, in the 60s and 70s, which, was a very volatile time in America, especially, around the time when the first Strata record came out in '73. I mean, Tricky Dick Nixon is, still in office and doing shit. And, we're in the middle of Vietnam and it's a very unpopular war, and civil rights era, is going, crazy, and the Black Panthers are still. I mean, there's just so much shit going on in America, man. Like, there's so much chaos, and out of all that chaos, you got to have some semblance of, peace, man, and and some of that peace came through music.
How does the story of Strata sort of resemble what's going on in today's society?
Wow. Well, we don't have Tricky Dick, but we do have somebody probably a lot worse, now. For like a collective like Strata to be around today would be very important, because I think a lot of the musicians, to me, because usually during the time of um, protest and unrest and chaos in this country, there's always been amazing protest music, revolutionary music come out. You don't really hear a lot of that now.
Right.
A lot of musicians are talking about how many cars and women and jewelry and blah blah blah. Like everybody's like getting messed up in a club and on so many drugs and blah blah blah. And it's just like, dude, like there are communities in this country that are suffering so bad, that we need to be speaking for them and give them a voice in a way that they don't have. And I don't really see a lot of people doing that. So a Strata like Able Collective would be very important in this time, because there's not a lot of people that have a voice. There's no one really speaking up for them. I mean, there are some people, but there's not enough.
Right.
And it's not enough on the local level either. And it's just, really is sad that, that there isn't anyone really out there. There isn't really one label or collective or that I know of that, is doing that. Now, I don't really know if that answers your question, but I think that's, in my opinion, that's why Strata would be needed,
Right.
because of the lack of void of, just no one has come behind Strata and said, like, we had some labels in the 80s, maybe some in the 90s, but, since the 21st century, it's all been about, money, 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 money,
Right.
you know? And I'm not knocking people for wanting to make money, man, but like, it used to be when you made money as an artist, sometimes you would like, not sometimes, but a lot of times they would try to pull the communities up with them too. And you just don't see a lot of that now,
Oh, definitely, definitely.
you know?
With the release of Charles Mingus Jazz in Detroit Strata Concert Gallery, what's really what's special about these recordings?
To me, the most special thing about them is just the intimate atmosphere of them. Now, you listen to a lot of live recording, whether it's at Carnegie Hall or wherever in the world, you know what I mean? Some big, Lincoln Center or something like that. It's all about the music, and it's not really about the atmosphere too. So they cut out everything. They cut out all of the microphone feedback. They cut out all the conversation between the band sometimes, and the conversation of the audience. Whereas this place was really, it was an intimate place. So I left purposely some microphone distortion in there. I left a lot of the conversation that was going on in the background. I left a lot of the conversation between Mingus and the band, the banter between them, because I felt like it makes you feel like you're actually there, and I really wanted to convey that viewpoint to the listener. So for me, that's very important. The second thing is that, for Mingus fans who really know his music and pretty much know, because everybody's like, it's George Adams playing on this record. I'm like, no, actually, Roy Brooks is playing the drums on this one. They're like, wow. So like he had an unusual cast for this. John Stubblefield only played with him for like 6 months before they got into a fight, and he was fired from the band. So this is the only time you ever hear Mingus and Stubblefield play together on record. And then you got two songs, one Dizzy's Profile, which was never recorded or never on any other record except for now, and then Not in Your Head Blues, which was recorded for the first time on this, but then they put it out in 1977, so it's still kind of a rare thing. And the other thing for me is like not one song is under 12 minutes, so these guys really get loose, and they really just get loose and they feel comfortable. And again, this is a small space. A lot of songs are between 20 and 30 minutes long, so you got to be invested.
Yeah.
You got to be really invested to listen to it. And I've heard some people like, oh, it's really long, man. Like, I got to sit, like, it's not. I kind of also wanted to do that too, because it's like we consume music and life too much these days so quickly, and we just dispose of it. Where sometimes you got to really just sit with something and let it marinate with you and let it breathe and just let it soak it all in. So it's not for the person who's going to be like, oh, I'm just going to be a quick listen, because it's not, and you won't get it if you're going to come with that attitude of it.
I was reading in
So yeah.
the booklet how that Charles Mingus was, a very important artist of this time, but it was also during a time where, as it says, jazz was being marginalized. Talk more about that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, jazz was being marginalized at that time, especially in '73, because you got all these other music forms coming along, funk, it's been coming around, and right before disco came, and really disco kind of killed a lot of the things for jazz, because jazz was one of those things where, especially when hard bop and bebop came around, it wasn't something that you would dance to. People would sit down in clubs, have their cognac or whatever and sit and listen to. So there wasn't really like a dance aspect to it. It wasn't until like rhythm and blues and like funk and soul came around when James Brown came around. Because by the time '73 came around, James Brown was in the middle of being who he is, the legend. So you got music that people were dancing all up and down around. And I think that's one of the reasons why Miles decided to go in the direction he did of fusing other music forms with jazz to because as he said, I was bored. Miles was like, I was bored and I wanted to create something that, would keep my attention, and also it kept a lot of people's attention um, around. So I just think that, jazz, at that time was, and then also, like there's a part on the recording too, like right before the Roy Brooks interview, the interviewer Bud Spangler's talking to one of the some journalists at the time, and he's talking about how like what they're trying to do the jazz, and they're trying to say, well, this is real jazz music and that's not real jazz music, and what they're saying is real jazz music. It's like really watered down, like sterile music, and they're propping up certain artists as like this is the person that's so it's like the labels in corporate America was co-opting the music of jazz and bastardizing it.
Yeah.
And people could see that back in '73, and pretty much to me that's what happened to hip hop right now. It's like
Right.
nobody's learned the lesson, like it keeps on happening. It's like a gift that keeps on giving, unfortunately, you know.
Right.
So like, yeah, I mean, just people couldn't, really do what they wanted to do, and you know, and that's why like a Don Cherry and Dexter Gordon and all those other jazz musicians came to Europe, because people in Europe are like, we still love traditional jazz, or we actually have never heard it in its proper form. So they got to come here in Europe and get appreciated, be welcomed, and make a living, which was also obviously very important because a lot of these guys were going broke.
Yeah.
You know, they weren't able to make a living, and honestly, yeah, we love to make music and all that other stuff, but you gotta eat to live. So that's what I would say.
In your research, what sort of a person was Charles Mingus? When I was reading the liner notes, the word troubled soul was used at one point.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, people said he was a troubled soul because he was a volatile person. He was the type of person. He was a hard taskmaster, task master. Because he, he would be on you. Like if you couldn't play the notes or you couldn't keep up with him or anything like that, he would come over to you and tell you. He would get in your face, and a few times he was physical with people. And he was a very opinionated person. Like he wasn't really into like free jazz, and he made it known. That he was not into free jazz. He was not a big fan of Ornette Coleman and that whole style of free jazz. For him, he thought they were just making a bunch of noise. Like he even said that. He's like, this is just a bunch of noise. You guys are not really knowing what you're doing. You're just throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. So, being that you're such an opinionated person like that, of course, there's going to be some backlash and people are going to be looking at you different. But I think the other part of why he was considered a troubled soul is because a lot of his music spoke to Black Americans. He had a revolutionary aspect to his music where he was trying to speak for Black people in America. And ever since, the 50s, 40s, when he started on up to '73, for Black people in America, it was obviously tough, you know. So like in the wider audience, they're not trying to hear that, you know. They just want you to shut up and play. Kind of how like, Laura Ingham said to LeBron James, just shut up and play.
Right.
Stop talking about politics. And Mingus was not going to do that. He's like, let my children hear music. Let the young ones experience this, because if they experience this madness, we're all going to go insane on this planet. And we need something like that. So I think, quite honestly, there was some racism involved in what, because I mean, people talk about how volatile he was, but I mean, Miles was a motherfucker, man. I don't know if I can curse on your own. Yeah. But he was an asshole to people. I mean, he was physically abusive to several of his wives, but he's still considered a genius. You don't really hear people going at him about that. Same thing with James Brown. James Brown was, physical with some of the women in his life. And he really treated his band members like crap. And you saw that in the film Soul Power and other ones about him, and Bootsy and all those guys have written a litany of things that James Brown was like, but he's still considered a genius. When you come to Mingus, it's kind of like, he doesn't get almost the same respect, because, he was first of all, the bass, it's not for some people, it's not a sexy instrument like, the trumpet or the piano, you know what I mean? He's playing a bass and he's playing a double bass. So, you're getting people like, whoa, okay, yeah, he's cool, but that's the bass. Who cares? It's like, you should care. This guy was a genius. He was one of the greatest composers in this country. I mean, the only other composer I think in America that is more prolific and a legend is Duke Ellington.
Yeah.
So like, the man should get a lot of props for what he did. What he had to go through. And if he was a little volatile, okay, all right, cool. I mean, some things he should have. I'm sure he probably regretted doing, but you can't live your life with regret. So yeah, that's what I would say.
What do you think was Charles Mingus's influence at the time for jazz music, and then what do you think his legacy will be?
Um, hmm. What I would think his influence on jazz music was, for I'm not going to speak as an expert on him or on jazz music, but I will say that I think his influence was just his arrangements, how he was able to arrange songs, his leadership skills as a band leader, I think were top notch. I mean, he went through several different bands, quintets or whatever, but he always was able to get, I think, the best out of them. And that's not an easy thing to be a great composer, a great band leader, and by the way, I also play a mean bass. There's not a lot of people that can do that. You know what I mean? So I think his improvisation skills, also are top notch. I think that that's one of the things that really separates him from a lot of the jazz musicians at the time. I think one of the things that makes him different from like Miles, I felt like Miles was the type of person who created. He was like more of like a freestyler to create, whereas like I think Mingus was more of a structural creative person. He needed some kind of initial structure to then create off of that and freestyle off of that. It's kind of like some DJs, like they can just show up without having a planned set and just play random songs off their computer or through their record collection and rock a party. Where some people need to actually I need to sit and plan a set. You know what I mean? Right. And I think the second part of your question was again?
What would his legacy be?
Wow. I mean, his legacy would be, just really pushing music forward and just, he didn't fall into the thing of like the whole jazz fusion thing. He basically kind of stuck to, hard bop and stuff like that. So for me, he was a very consistent person in that sense, and that consistency, really separated him from many others. And I just think that, him being a multi-purpose musician and, what he had to go through as a black man in America and be able to express that through his music and through his arrangements and through his lifestyle, it makes him a very unique individual, none like we're going to see in a long time. You know, I can't think of anybody right now who I could put and say, hey, you know what, that person reminds me of Mingus. You know, he has that little edge to him.
Right.
You know, he can arrange, he can lead a band, but he can also get in your face if you're not playing right. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't know anyone like that who has all of those aspects to him. You know, and he really cared about his community.
Right.
You know, he really cared about his community, and that's a special thing that I don't, that comes around once in a while. And like again, I don't really know anyone that's really taken that torch now in jazz.
As someone like you who's been a lifelong jazz fan, is there any newer artists, newer musicians that you're quite fond of who are you think are doing some special things?
I like Kamasi Washington. Um, I like Yusuf Kamal. No, Yusuf. Yeah, is it Yusuf Kamal? I think it's Yusuf Kamal. I always get it um, mixed up with someone else. But Yusuf Kamal. I like Nubia Garcia. I like Jose James. I like what they're trying to do. I know some of them get criticized, for not really sticking true to, the roots of jazz. But I mean, who is right now? You know,
Right.
who is right now? So and a lot of this is coming from people who, are not really doing what they're saying, what they're criticizing other people for doing. So I mean, at least there's a younger generation, trying to make it happen. I recently got put onto this cat named Makai McCraven. You know,
Okay.
I think he's from California. We all did the Berlin Jazz Festival last weekend, actually last Saturday, together. It was like him, Nubia Garcia, and this other guy named Joe Armand Jones, who's another one that I think is really good. You know, there's like a burgeoning young, when I say young, but like millennial jazz scene in London, man, that's happening. That's really, really, really happening, man. And they all play together, they all jam together. And I wish we had something like that in America. I mean, Kamazi has his collective, you know, and there's probably a few other collectives, but it's just not the same, you know. And again, it's like, someone from over here in Europe has to show us again how it's done of something that we created, you know.
Yeah, it's funny that overseas in Europe, like they'll still have appreciation for a lot of different types of music, whether it is jazz or hip hop or heavy
Yep.
metal or 80s metal, and they'll just kind of
Yeah.
they'll even just put it all together, all the different types of rock music together in a festival or, jazz with hip hop or whatever. Being that you're over there, what's sort
Mm.
of the feeling about the appreciation for music?
The appreciation for music over here is great. It's like there's a lot of knowledgeable people. You can't play like I remember the first time I came over here in 2004, and I played in Munich at this place called the Atomic Cafe, and I'm playing like some James Brown because it was like a funk party, and I'm like, okay, that's funk. And this woman came over to me and she said something in German. I was like, I don't speak German, and she was like, okay, please stop ping the bullshit. Go back to the real, go to the real funk. I was like, whoa. I was like, whoa, okay. I thought I was playing, and I got a quick lesson that people, they're like, well, yeah, we love James Brown too, and we know that, but we want you to go deep. We don't want to hear what, like the regular stuff. So then after that, I was like, oh, okay, cool, I got you, and I learned from there that people over there really appreciate, music in a way that it's, and then they dance to it too. It's not just a, like a nerdy thing. People dance to the music as well, but they want to dance to something that's just as infectious, but they may not know what it is.
Yeah.
When you're in London and playing and you as a DJ and you're playing music and people are like, tune, tune, man, tune. That's like when you've done a good job, you know. So, um, yeah.
So, what's next for you? What's on the horizon for DJ Amir?
Oh, what's next on the horizon for me is still, working this Mingus thing, Also, I'm working on the next Strata release, which is Sphere record. But I did find one of the masters because there've been several masters for all of these, recordings. I found a master with like three extra tracks that were not on the vinyl. So it's gonna come with, so it'll be a double vinyl with those extra tracks. Um, and I'm trying to track down the other live recordings with Herbie and Ornette Coleman and everyone else that performed at the Strata Concert Gallery. And the other thing too is like, I'm gonna create my own lecture series where I'm gonna be going around Europe and just talking about my discovery of the Mingus, recordings and my work with Strata, because I think it's a very important story that, a lot of music historians, especially jazz historians, need to know. So that's pretty much what I got going on in the future, and I'll still be in Berlin, between Berlin and Brooklyn, and then trying to put out some more compilations with BBE. I don't know what those will be right now. I'm still trying to figure that out, but I'm in no rush, you know. So that's pretty much what I got going on. It's a lot, I think, but
Right.
Could probably be more,
Right. Yeah, before we get out here, I always like to end my interviews with the same question. And that question is, who's somebody that's been a part of your life or career that I could realistically interview that would have some good stories or lessons to talk about?
Oh, that would be Lenny Sinclair. Lenny Sinclair you talk about a person that has story. I mean, first of all, her story, period, is amazing. So she worked with Strata. She took a lot of photography. She's a famous photographer on her own herself.
Yeah.
She's taking photos of Fela, whoever. And just coming from East Germany, to America, that's why she still has a thick kind of German accent. But I mean, that's a person that you really want to talk to who has some rich Detroit, music history in her.
Right.
That's a person you really, really you would be sitting there all day like, wow, 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 really, wow. Like you just, you wouldn't even want to leave, because she has so much history and she's so cool, man. She's so cool, and she just wants to be able to share a lot of that stuff. She's been through a lot,
Right.
To get where she's at, and it wasn't easy for her and everybody in Strata because you're trying to do all this revolutionary type of work, and you're trying to be creative and everything, but you got a lot of people against you, a lot of haters, as they say, they're willing to take your life, not just hate on you.
Right.
So I would definitely recommend her, and she's in Detroit still,
Right.
So that would be a person I would say.
Right. Before we get out here, where can people go online to check out what's going on with you, and more information about this Mingus project?
I would say the best way is either facebook.com 180 Proof Records, or and I need to update my website, so I would use that one, but it's not updated yet. I need to get around to doing that. When you're a one-man operation, it's kind of hard to do everything.
Right.
But I would say like that or Instagram 180 Proof. I use both of those very, very, very much, and I'm always posting everything that that I got going on, reviews. And then for me as a personal DJ, it would just be facebook.com, DJ Amir. I'm posting on my gigs and everything like that. So, so that's pretty much it, man. I really appreciate the opportunity, man.
All right, great. Yeah, thanks for chatting with me. It's been great talking with you, man.
Oh, no worries, man. No worries. And, good luck with everything. And
So that was my interview with DJ Amir Abdullah. All the links to where you can follow DJ Amir and also purchase and stream the Charles Mingus Jazz in Detroit Strata Concert Gallery 46 Selden is all in the show notes for this episode at freshasthepodcast.com. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. See you next time. Goodbye and good night.
Fresh is the word.